Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Privacy Snapshot, where we're going to be talking about cyber insurance, which is a topic that is being talked about a lot, especially in light of the increased requirements and obligations stemming from the California Consumer Privacy Act. I'm really excited that Joe Brusnman is with me today. He's the VP at Chesapeake Brokers, but he has a background in IT and a robotics degree and a master's in cybersecurity law, and has recently published a book, Damage Control, which we are going to be providing the link for at the end. An excellent publication on lots of considerations with cyber insurance coverage. And I know this is of interest. So Joe, Privacy Snapshot is, we have a short amount of time to talk about a big thing, but cyber insurance is just on everybody's mind, and you're a cyber insurance guy. I kind of come from the legal side of things. My background, I've worked in operational stuff. So the first question I have, and really the main one, is how does somebody like me, somebody who's working in privacy compliance operations and the legal considerations, really fit into the whole process of cyber insurance, and what kinds of things they be thinking about?
That's really a great question. So there's a huge overlap between the compliance side and the insurance side. To kind of give you just a broad example, most cyber insurance applications will ask you some derivative of a question such as, are you compliant with all state and federal cybersecurity and privacy laws?
Huh.
And so a question that broad is just a minefield for cyber insurers to actually deny coverage on somebody. So that's just one amongst many questions where really the privacy side needs to come in to the insurance side and actually assist that business to understand, okay, first of all, what laws actually apply to you? Two, are you compliant, if that's even possible, right? Because we know compliance is more of a journey, not really a destination. Mm-hmm. So that's just kind of a brief example there of how that comes into play, because it's really important not only to help deny coverage, but also because the regulatory fines and penalties, those are really starting to ramp up. And I think every attorney general is thinking about running for Congress, and they're hanging their hat on consumer protections. And kind of the easy, interesting one that people would understand is cybersecurity. So company got breached, attorney general comes in, does an investigation. They weren't, adhering to some or all of the particular law that adheres to their circumstance, and then they get a fine, and the attorney general looks good. So it's going to be a big deal going forward.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point, because I still observe there's a notion out there that if I have cyber coverage, I'll be fine. So maybe I don't have to worry so much about things. So comply with all cybersecurity laws. That's, to your point, I mean, compliance is a journey. It's not a moment in time. I think the best most companies can do is to demonstrate that capacity to comply. So could you say a bit of what should professionals like myself and others be thinking about to meet those requirements in the event, of a breach?
Yeah, so it's, just talking about how to actually comply. That's another area where I don't think companies really understand what goes on after a breach occurs. So they'll see some snapshot in the news where a journalist who really doesn't know what he's talking about just says, hey, this company got breached. But what you don't see, and I can say this from firsthand experience, having dealt with well over a breach a week last year, just for my own clients, on top of people who had already been breached and were my clients calling me. I mean, just the mountains of data you have to pile through. So, I mean, just at kind of like bare bones, let's say that you're an online retailer. Well, you could potentially have to deal with 50 different state and territory breach notification laws, which honestly, you're not going to do that yourself. Then you're going to have to deal with each one of those laws has particular requirements, such as who you notify within that particular state. So various governmental and regulatory agencies within that state, specific timelines that you have to deal with, all of these issues. I mean, it just turns into this huge spider web. And so in a cyber policy, most cyber policies will allow for an attorney to be provided to you that specializes in this area. But companies make the mistake where they haven't kind of thought about this beforehand and started figuring out, okay, who's going to be in charge of what issues and how are we going to relay this information to our clients to avoid losing clients? You know, how do we make this as smooth as possible? Because realistically, I think every company should now come to the conclusion, eventually we're going to get breached in one way or another, and we're going to have to deal with this issue. So let's make plans now. Let's work with that privacy attorney, see what our requirements are currently, what they're going to be, and how we're going to deal with that issue.
So we could talk a very long time about this, and I have so many questions. And because this is a snapshot, I'm going to wrap it up with a final question and refer people to your book, where you get into a lot of the details about things to look for and lots of considerations. But I don't know, this may be an unfair question, but when you said you dealt with a breach a week last year, and that was just your clients, I mean, that's astounding. You're one person. So how many more? When you think about that, is there something you learned over all other matters that you learned or considered that could be a key takeaway? If there's one thing that just stands out in your mind as a great takeaway, like would it be, you know, assigning ownership, doing tabletop exercises, knowing how to do your notifications? Like what would be the one thing that would make that process easier? I know there'd be many, but if there's one thing that stands out more than others.
So essentially, like how to make the post-breach process easier?
Right. Once you're in that, so it's not a firestorm and you're not scrambling. Would there be one thing that could make that just go a little smoother had more work been done ahead of time?
Yeah, I'd say probably the single greatest recommendation I would have that kind of ties everything together would actually be getting all the stakeholders in the company together, right, along with some sort of privacy attorney, privacy specialist, and actually go through that tabletop exercise. So really, you know, in the kind of the computing world, it's if this, then that. So if this happens, then what do we do? And that would tie in to assist you really thinking about, okay, what are your vulnerabilities? Who is going to be assigned to deal with those? So that way, you know, I have seen a number of companies actually, a breach occurs, everyone's stressed out. All of a sudden, everybody has a good idea and wants to be in charge. You can just squash that before it ever happens. You can assign who's going to be in charge of what, because there's going to be many, many facets involved with the breach that you probably don't think about till you go through the exercise. And the other aspect of that is, if this, then that, okay, who's in charge, what happened? Then let's look at your cyber policy and see, is this actually covered under your cyber policy? Because unlike pretty much every other area of insurance, there is no standard cyber insurance policy. As a matter of fact, cyber insurance isn't even a thing. It's not a legal term. It's not an insurance term. It's just this idea that society has that we've placed upon somehow having insurance if something bad happens with a computer. So it's a very sophisticated, multi-layered kind of process, but just starting with that tabletop exercise, bring all the right people in and just kind of war game through. What if we send money to the wrong place? Okay, how did that happen? What if we get ransomware? Okay, do we have backups? What's the periodicity? Okay, the backup was encrypted. Now what do we do? Just kind of going through that process, I think that would save people a lot of pain and heartache later down the road if they just kind of thought through these fundamental steps.
That is great advice. Tabletop exercises, and then strategy and tactics, and somebody's got to be in control, knowing who that's going to be. So thank you, Joe. I know we could go on, and it would be interesting to do that, but I'm going to refer people to your book, which is chock full of great information. And of course, at Blue Sky Privacy, we're here to support your privacy compliance program goals and needs. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for having me.